Welcome to Go Get Great, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs and ambitious small business owners. I'm your host, Brittany, owner of Brittany Miller Socials and mother of 3. Go Get Great is all about helping you make life and business work together. You'll learn about the fumbles that helped get me and my guests to where we are today so you don't have to make them. So come join the journey with Go Get Great. Good morning. I am so excited to welcome another incredible guest to the Go Get Great podcast. Joining me today is Leith McKay. Leith is a fellow podcast host and member of the Monarch community. So we are going to be chatting about lots of different things, our experience as podcast hosts mainly, but also a little bit about what life looks like and how we kind of fit podcasting into that. So in case you haven't met Leith yet, she loves talking about women and their journeys of overcoming challenges, struggles, and feelings of being stuck, which is definitely something that we covered today. If you're wondering, who am I or what do I really want, then you should definitely check out her podcast, Finding Me, because each week they talk about the new discoveries and what it's like to be human and experiencing these things and to find out what happens and how we can get unstuck. So there's so much gold in there listening to these other women, how they've found themselves and got unstuck in their own journey that you can apply to your own. Because like Leith says, life is not a curated Instagram feed. It's not for everyone. It's definitely messy. It's very vulnerable, but it is also very inspiring. So I hope that you're going to be inspired listening to her speak today. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. So good morning. Welcome to the Go Get Great podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Brittany.
I am so excited to chat with you because you have a podcast yourself, and I know podcasts are growing in popularity, but there's still very few people who actually have them. So I'm excited to talk to someone else about their podcasting experience and kind of how it's different than mine. So for those of our listeners who don't know you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then we'll dive in.
Sure. My name is Leith McKay, and I'm the host of the Finding Me podcast. This podcast started... Well, I'm starting my 6th season this coming up. I know. So I've been doing it quite a long time. And I started in 2018 when I thought the podcasting world was saturated, but it's only even been growing since then, which is crazy in such a good way. I think my journey may be different from yours, and I know we'll get into these details, but it's been really an evolution of my own curiosity, and that's how I even started podcasting, was just like, I'm going to try this. Maybe it might be different from what I was doing before. And that's just evolved to get to me where I am today.
That's exciting. So what is your podcast about?
Yes. Finding Me is conversations with women who have found themselves stuck. So with everyone, it is a little bit different. We get into whether it's relationship challenges, health crises, financial challenges, whatever it may be. We reflect, like with each woman, I reflect on where she was at a time of crisis and the little steps she took to move forward into a much more energized and inspired way of living.
I love it. It's like practical problem solving for adults, the skills they should teach you in school and don't.
Right, exactly. And like everyone, we sort of think that all of our problems are external, it's the other person in our life or the health problem but as every woman who has learned how to get unstuck realize it's actually an internal journey. And so understanding what is this problem, like how is this part of like who I am, and what questions can I ask myself to try and move forward in a new way.
Yeah, I think that's so smart too. And a lot of it would be, I'm sure, very interesting. And I've listened to some of your episodes, so I know this. It's so interesting to hear how people are stuck in a way that is kind of similar, but a little bit different than yours. And like what you can learn from their process of moving through that stuckness that then you can apply to your own life, which I think is really amazing. One of the reasons why I like listening.
Yeah, I think, and what you're pointing out there, which I think is so valuable, is it's listening. So when we're hearing somebody else's story, we're sort of processing it and listening to how we can incorporate it into our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is not a space that we often give ourselves permission to open up. Like, we're just always doing. So when we like stop to actually listen to somebody else's journey and apply those lessons to our own lives, it's really like an internal processing, giving ourselves that space to process that internally and think, how can I apply that to my own life and get unstuck in something that may be different, like, but ultimately, as I said, it's sort of the same in sense it's an internal journey. It's asking ourselves new and different questions and really putting a lens of curiosity on our own situation, which is really what I love about what I do and the questions I ask. And it helps me all the time because everyone's in a place of feeling stuck. It doesn't matter what it is, like your business, your kids, as we just talked about, off screen about parenting. It's all about just trying to ask new questions and look at something in a new perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great too hearing it from someone else and you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Maybe I'll try this. And I think one thing that we don't really think about as individuals is that we are always stuck in something. No area of our life ever, well, all areas rather of our life never run completely smoothly at all times. There's always a block somewhere and it's, identifying it, moving through it, and then, moving on to the next block in a different area. It's just kind of the evolution of being human.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And it's easy to think that everyone else has it all together and knows exactly what they're doing, when in fact, that is never the case. And often those who look like they're perfect have their own challenges behind the scenes that we just don't see. We don't share those things often.
Absolutely.
So that's part of what I'm trying to do, is also to normalize feeling stuck and to normalize the process of getting unstuck, and that it's a journey and we're all sort of going through it at our own pace. And I think that really, like, one of the biggest feedbacks I get is when I listen to her podcast and your conversations, I don't feel so alone. I know that there's somebody else out there who is struggling with something similar. And so it just gives everyone permission to be okay with that, be okay with feeling stuck and trying to work through it.
And I also think that it really helps kind of break through the stigma of, behind closed doors, because we're not supposed to talk about this stuff. We're only supposed to focus on the positive and the optimism. And like the reality is that there's a lot that we need to work through, but we are a society that has not been taught how to work through it or how to ask for help often working through it. So, it's unfortunate, but yeah, it's like all of I don't drink coffee or wine, nor do I always have lots of mom friends. But when I do get together with the few that I do, it's just so nice to kind of have that open space to share what you're struggling with and kind of get that insight. And your podcast is basically just a little bit more of an extension of that.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah. So I love to think that people are listening and trying to apply those lessons to their own lives, because we're all in this together. And as you said earlier, it's just, we're human, and it's okay to feel challenged and stuck in many areas of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about why you decided to start this podcast. Was this like your idea originally?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, like every journey, it goes a lot further back. And I would say probably mine, it's hard to say specifically where my journey began, but I'll just speak to specifically my career. So I graduated university, and up to that point, I had, checked all the boxes, done all the things. I was a good student. And then I got out into the world and I was totally overwhelmed, had no idea what I wanted to do. And so took a job and just tried it, and just felt totally lost, and tried different jobs. I went back to school. I got an MBA. I tried all these different things, and I just found everything soul destroying. Like I knew I was meant for more, but I could not figure out what that is. And I couldn't even find anybody to help me. You know, here I was looking at, oh, this job is not right. Okay, I'll try this one, or this industry. God, I jumped around industries. I tried all these different things. And I just got to a point where I was like, something, I guess, like so many women I interview, I hit a low. I like hit a crisis point, and that's when I knew like something has to change. I can't continue doing this. And for me, it coincided with having a kid and moving countries. So we moved to the United States, where I did not have a work visa. And I had two young kids at the time. And I thought, okay, this is my chance to figure out my next step. I'm going to like find something that inspires me. And I also thought I need to find my passion. Like I felt passionless and like something was wrong with me because I didn't have a passion. And I couldn't find it. So I just started trying some new things. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but one of the things I did, I was living in Silicon Valley and I went to a women in tech conference. I was like, okay, what are other women doing to, find their passion? Anyway, it was fascinating because all the different products and services that all these different women were providing was really inspiring. But what I found like most interesting was when some of these women got up on stage and told their backstory as to how they got to where they were today. And, all the challenges they overcame. And you don't see that written in their bio. It's just like highlights of, how well they've done or, how many units they've sold. So I just was like, these stories need to be told. Like I felt inspired by them. And it also was like, obviously part of my journey to say, not everyone's on this linear journey, which is what I thought I needed to be. You check the boxes, go to school, get married, have kids, all of these things. When in fact, everyone's journey was meandering and they were trying to figure it out as they went too. So I started a blog and it was telling the stories of working mothers. So I would go and interview women and record the conversation and then type up their journey. And at this point, I was sort of thinking, I'm going to learn from these women all the things that they've done to, find happiness in what they're doing. So I thought it was a very like sort of chronological thing. I recognized that there was some meandering, but I felt like I still felt at this time it was like, you got to take one step after the next, So I wrote up these stories and I had this blog and I went to Stanford, learned how to create a website. And so I was excited about, being creative and exploring new things. So that was great. And then I had my third kid and it just became really hard to spend all that time. The stories took me a long time to write up, find an angle, write it up. And then I was like, okay, podcasting has to be less time consuming. Honestly, that was my thinking. That's what got me started on podcasting.
Okay.
And at that point, like any journey, I sort of adapted a little as I went. And I was like, okay, rather than focusing on working mothers, I just want to talk to women and find out more generally and find out how they've overcome feeling stuck. So that's how I got into podcasting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I know the answer to this because we've talked about this before, but is it actually less time consuming than blogging? Well, I guess we haven't talked about that specifically, but is it less time consuming than blogging? And on average, how much time do you invest in your podcast each week or each month?
Good question. Yeah, I think it is less time consuming than at least the blogging that I was doing and the writing up, and how it took me a long time to write those stories. Now this time, podcasting, like I've only spent approximately an hour having the conversation. And then there's the additional time of editing that conversation and putting it all together with music and intros and stuff. And actually that part, I wouldn't say takes me the most time. When I do a conversation, I'm going to say that takes me, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, let's say, including the conversation time.
Mm-hmm.
It's the other time over and above that when I'm doing like an email newsletter and typing up. I'm very reflective in how I look at this. And
Mm-hmm.
I have the conversations and then I reflect what are the learnings I'm taking away from this conversation and what are like the gold nuggets that I feel are coming from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to share those.
Mm-hmm.
So I write up a newsletter, I do social media, type out posts for that. And that takes me longer than I would like, I have to admit. I mean, I probably spend at least 5 to 8 hours. I actually when I was away on the weekend at this retreat, I looked at the time frame and I think I calculated somewhere between 12 and 14 hours to do one episode.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Now, part of the reason part of the reason I was doing that was like, I need to cut back. This is crazy to spend this much time. Um, and it's partly because I don't do it all in one sitting. Like I do a little bit here and a little bit there. So I feel like I'm not always being efficient with my time. But it also, there's pros and cons to that. And then I also have the space to think about like what it is that I find inspiring about these stories and how I can share that. So I want to, like this season, I want to reduce that time. And also, I think I want to get into writing more consistently so that it's not such a struggle for me to sit down and stare at a blank screen and try and figure out, what I really want to say. Just that habit of writing and, they say that, for writers or people who write books to sit down every day and do it. And I feel the need to do that a little bit more. But then I also get caught up doing a million other things. So maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to give myself also permission because this is a passion project to not get stuck in I should do things a certain way and just allowing myself to go with the flow a little bit and to make rules for myself that really serve me rather than serving some unknown, some rule that a belief system that maybe is no longer serving me.
No, for
I
sure.
can't even remember the question.
And it sounds like your podcast is kind of like your outlet in a sense. Like it's how you learn and process the things that you're working through in your life. So it makes sense that you're spending more time on that than someone like me would, because I mean, I do learn a lot from my guest episodes and all of those things too, but a lot of it is just I am like verbal diarrheaing information out and then I'm sharing that with people. So it's a lot easier and more streamlined, I guess, in a sense for me to do that. I would say I spend personally myself on average 2 to 3 hours a week working on social media emails and then actually recording all of my episodes. And then Grayson spends about half an hour to an hour doing the actual editing. So about 4 hours in total, but I'm not doing it all myself. So, I mean, it depends on, I guess, kind of the purpose of your podcast, how much time you invest in it for those different things. But I'm curious what podcasting looked like for you when you got started. Because I know when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, I couldn't possibly have a podcast. I don't have a studio. I know nothing about editing. And I feel like there's just a lot of like mental stigma that's keeping people from starting a podcast when in reality, it's actually really easy.
Right.
Easier.
And it is very easy. And I think what sometimes can hold us back is the idea that there's one way to do things, when in fact, as soon as I take it like from a perspective of I'm just going to experiment, and this is what that was a little barrier I had to get over for sure. Be like, okay, I'm just going to experiment and try the lapel mics and see how that works. And so I tried that for some interviews. And even just finding a location, at that time I didn't have a little corner of my house. So I went to the library and invited women to this, the rooms at the library where we recorded. I've also tried to use like one mic that, sort of has like a surround sound type of thing. And that's worked okay. So I guess it's just been about trying different things,
Mm-hmm.
and it has evolved over this time. I started with Audacity, which was like is a free download that you can get for Windows users, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can and it's really not that hard. And then I say it now, it's not that hard, but you just go onto YouTube and be like, how do I use Audacity? And then
Mm-hmm.
you just have to experiment a little. So it does take a little bit of investment of time
Mm-hmm.
to try the Audacity, then to, plug in the mics. I have learned also through just trying. And I've had some conversations where I didn't properly record that
Mm-hmm.
didn't work out. I've lost conversations, I didn't save them properly. It's just been an experiment, the whole thing. And I think now I'm quite in a place where I'm like totally okay with that. But there was a time where that felt hard and feel like I
Mm-hmm.
should know how to do this. This shouldn't be hard. This shouldn't be hard. Everybody else can do this. So why can't I, sort of thing? And
Mm-hmm.
letting that part go and just, yeah, experimenting and trying it and diving in. It's really
Mm-hmm.
what I say is the best advice to starting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Now, a personal question, and if you don't want to
Mhm.
answer that, that's fine. I'll
Yeah.
have Grayson cut this out. But have you monetized your podcast?
Yeah, good question. I have not. Now this is another bit, I was going to say a blockage, but like there is definitely a little portion of shame within me that I should be monetizing this, which I'm happy, yeah, very happy to talk about. But so I'm of two minds. Like part of what had me start this podcast is really, I felt like when I moved to California and didn't have a work visa and, was diving into motherhood, that, I mean, we're told that like if you don't maintain a career as a mother, this is going to be a problem when you go back into the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like they look at it and be like, you've done nothing in that time, even though, you and I and millions of people know how hard it is to parent.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like a huge gap on your resume, which is considered to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what motivated me to do the blog and the podcast is like, this is my exploration of trying something new. This is my way of learning as I'm going to fill that space on my resume.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have also gotten to a place where like, I'm like, I don't care about the resume anymore. I like, but,
Love it.
but, like I don't see myself going back into
Mhm.
like a big corporation. I'm much more inclined to, be entrepreneurial and
Mhm.
figure out a way to make money. But at the moment, I don't. Um, I've also looked in, that there's traditional or standard ways to make money, mainly through advertising,
Mhm.
and which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think I have to get my or my listenership up to a level that people would be interested. And I have not been good about tracking that. I'll be the first to admit
Mm.
that. And it requires a lot more time to, to reach out to people, to get their spiel that then you have to record and edit into your conversations. And
Mhm.
I don't want to spend that time right now. I have just decided that that's not where I want to put my energy.
Mhm.
So I am not, and I'm choosing not to. Although there is still part of me that feels some shame around that. But here we are.
I so appreciate your transparency with that. And I think that it's a good thing for people to think about because everyone talks about, oh, how can I monetize? How quickly can I start making money from my podcast? Like, when is this going to be a return on my investment?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, pump the brakes a little bit because nothing ever happens overnight. So, like, if you think you're going to put out one podcast episode and make $1,000, like, that's not going to happen. Please don't start podcasting because you're just going to stop.
Right.
But also, is it worth the time and the energy to go out and do these things, or are there other ways that you can monetize? So you
Mm-hmm.
do and I hope this term isn't offensive, but I consider it more hobby podcasting. You're doing it because of the passion behind it. It's not meant to generate all of this income for your business. Whereas most of the people that interact with me and listen to my podcast are coming from a business perspective. So they have that monetization goal. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that just that having a podcast generates money in your business because it helps people get to know you and create that personal connection. Whereas they don't see that in their mind. They think that it needs to be like advertising dollars coming in, like that is monetizing to them, when there's like so much more potential out there. And like you, if you were to ever decide, hey, I want to monetize, maybe it doesn't look like ad revenue. Maybe it looks like putting a course together about, how to set a daily schedule as a mom that works or something like that. And people are going to buy it because they've listened to you, they trust you. That is monetizing in my mind.
No, you raise a great point. And I think ultimately, yes, it's not my podcast that's going to make money. It's something else that I do. And I actually have come to a place where I totally trust that that's going to happen. I just can't necessarily envision exactly how. Like, I totally trust that this podcast is a stepping stone for me, but I don't know where that's going to go. And it's going to lead to great things for me. It's going to, it's going to work out that I'm ultimately going to make money. But it might not be necessarily from this podcast. And I love that about it. It also gives me some freedom to be like, do what I want with it rather than feeling hampered by other expectations and this pressure of having to earn money. And I do know, like you're saying, a number of people who have a business and then the podcasting is just one small arm of it, to your point, like getting to know you and all the things that you've learned and sharing that. And then that just, creates awareness that drives people back to the money part of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but like, what's the biggest thing you've learned from your podcast? Maybe not necessarily about podcasting, but like in general.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, the biggest thing I've learned is every woman I've spoken to, the way like she's got unstuck through having curiosity around herself. So asking herself new and different questions. So we often find ourselves stuck because of an external factor, like we've talked about relationships, money, health. Health is a big one. And asking questions around how can I actually like nourish my body in a different way so that, I'm not having all these external issues. And often we find like we get so stuck in a place where we're looking through a keyhole at our problem when really we need to open the door and ask a new and different question. And it's that openness to being curious, to exploring our own limiting beliefs, and really just exploring our whole belief system. And as soon as we look at things from a new way, it allows us to take like one step forward and get unstuck.
I love that. I love that what you've learned is like applies to everything.
Yeah. And that's the crazy part about it is you think that there's, different solutions to different problems when in fact it's all the same. It's all just different versions of the same problem and it's just asking new and different questions to move forward.
I like that. And I think it's truthfully something that we don't spend enough time doing as individuals or as business owners. Like I talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh, well, I've been doing this and I've been doing it like exactly the same for like, 6 months, 12 months, a year, or 2 years, and it's not working. And I was like, well, maybe we need to shift what we're doing because it's not working. But we often don't take the time to step back and reflect and kind of ask those questions. So that's something that, I mean, just as a tangent, I've been working more on this year. It's like every time I get frustrated, that's my personal indicator of frustration. For some people, it's anger. Maybe some people it's curiosity. But for me, it's frustration. So every time I start to get frustrated, I'm trying to make a mental note to step back and be like, okay, what is causing this frustration? And like, what could I do differently? So this morning it was like, okay, well, my frustration is my kids don't want to go to school. Like, we're a week in and they're like, Mommy, we want to spend time with you. We want to go and play, like, whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, rather than dropping two screaming children off at school, which seems like a bad idea, what can I do differently? And I'm like, okay, you know what? I don't have anything on my schedule for the next 2.5 hours. We're just going to play hooky for an hour and we're going to go hang out. And we went to McDonald's because they wanted to run around in the play equipment. And then they very happily went off to school after that. And it was like, okay, not how I envisioned my morning, but we're doing it differently. And that, filled my kids' cup for the afternoon. So hopefully they will come home and have had a great day at school rather than me forcing them to go when they didn't want to.
Oh, I love that so much. Like, what a great way of, yeah, asking yourself, does it need to, like, do we have to have a morning like this? And then how can this morning look differently? I love that because we so rarely ask, how can, or one of the things I think about that I learned also on this retreat this weekend is asking yourselves, like, how can this situation, like, how can the morning routine bring me joy? Or how can it be more fun? Like, why does everything have to be a slog? And so just by asking that, you seem to find a different way of looking at it where it was a compromise, I guess. Your kids stayed home a little bit longer and then everyone went into their day happier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of coming back to what, again, we talked about off air, I miss slow mornings. That is one of the things I miss about summertime, and just being able to like get up and it be like more or less a blank slate of, okay, what do we want to do today? What is exciting us, getting us curious? And, I learn a lot of my curiosity from my kids, actually, because they never stop asking questions and wondering how and why things works. And a lot of times they're like, but why, mommy? And I feel like as a parent, our instinction is to go, just because that's the way it is. That's what I'm saying. That's how it has to be. But I find often when I stop and ask myself, okay, but like actually, but why? Why does it have to be like that? We realize that there's different ways to do things, and it doesn't have to be just, what you grew up with or what society tells you.
I think that's so true because what we're doing in those moments when we're rethinking, we're actually giving ourselves space to think about it differently, which sometimes feels hard because we're like, we don't have time, need to do all these things. But like when we don't have time to think it through, we just end up doing it just because, right? Or telling your kids it's just because. But that space to like think about something differently can give you a whole new perspective. And like, then you end up listening to yourself a little bit more. Like, what do I really want? Like, how do I really want my mornings to go? Like, what would actually be better for me? And I've done something similar where my kids take a bus to school and they complain about the bus all the time.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. So I was like, well, do our mornings really have to be like rushing to get to the bus that nobody wants to be on? I'm like, no, you know what? I can actually drive my kids to school. So yes, it takes more time, but then we don't have to meet a bus at a specific time. And that time in the car just like eases us all into the day. So their day is better and so is mine. And I just find, just that little bit of space to ask how this one specific problem can look differently can really be changing to your whole day. And then that sets you up for more energy and just easier to think through your own problems throughout the day. Get your work done.
Yeah, absolutely. And if, you're thinking about podcasting and you're like, we can apply the same thing. So it doesn't have to look like having a studio or renting fancy space or having expensive equipment. You can use a computer. You can use your cell phone. Like you said, the lapel mics. I'm curious, did the lapel mics work?
Yeah, they're okay. I don't use them anymore, but I bought cheapies off of Amazon, which was fine to get started. We ended up investing in some other equipment. Like my husband's into music, so he got some other equipment that now I use. But the lapel mics work totally fine, and I have a Mac computer now, so I just use GarageBand on my computer. Like there are things that you don't even have to go on. So many things you don't really need to buy. It's all right there in front of you, and then that helps you get started. I'm trying to think of what else you need to get started. Obviously, a microphone, a software like GarageBand or Audacity works well. I don't know what you use. Oh, your partner has a special setup.
Yeah, I mean, this is special in air quotes. It just means he's more skilled and has things on his computer that I don't. But yeah, he uses Audacity. We're actually starting to record YouTube video tutorials of how people can use them too. So if you're listening, definitely go and check that out. We've got one up right now, I think, for helping with intros and outros, and we've got a couple more planned. But it is very easy to use. Like, even if I wanted to, and I mean, I don't, because I'm fortunate that he does it for me, but I could. Now that I've seen how it works, I could do it myself. I choose not to, but I could. It's very beginner friendly. And I feel like there's just so many scary perceptions about what podcasting looks like. Like, it's time consuming, it's expensive, and all of those things, when it doesn't have to. You just have to ask yourself, well, what can I do differently? What works well for me? So for you, it was, getting the lapel mics and having those in-person one-on-one conversations. For me, I have to use Zoom because the people that I'm interested in talking to do not live in my neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, that was something in COVID too that changed for me, where doing more Zoom. And that's the thing about Zoom too, is like we're recording the video, so you automatically have a video conversation. And that's something actually I want to get into more. I've been thinking about how to do video in person. So that might be something. But Zoom does make it easy as long as you purchase the Zoom, because otherwise you're limited to 40 minutes or something, which I have learned the hard way. Yeah. And what else can you do in video? I feel like there's other software. Like I was looking at Riverside. Do you know Riverside?
Yeah.
You can go on there, purchase a monthly membership, and then you get the video, you get the transcription on there, which I find particularly helpful. I like being able to go back to my conversations and pull out quotes or without having to listen to the whole thing. So I do like transcription, and then the editing. I don't know if you can actually edit in Riverside, but I'm sure you might be able to, a certain amount anyway. I actually try not to do much editing in my conversations. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of an intro, we'll have like a banter back and forth that I might edit out, like, or at the very end. But otherwise, everything in the middle is like the conversation is the conversation. If I can't, if I'm like have a moment where I can't think of a question, I keep that in. That to me is like human. It's like part of the conversation, and I don't necessarily want it to come across perfectly polished.
It's very authentic, which makes it really relatable. And I think you bring up a good point. Everyone's like, has to be this perfect thing that sounds like it walked off of like a Hollywood production. It was like, no one wants that. No one wants to listen to something. I mean, like we watch movies, but like we want relatable, we want real. So like Grayson will edit, but he mainly just edits out the spaces, because I am notorious when I record solo and I'll be like, where was I going with this? And then I have to have like a 2-minute pause to like find my thought and weave it back into the topic. So there's editing required for those ones. But for our guest conversations, he just basically slaps the intro and outro on it and off it goes. It doesn't have to be challenging that way. It doesn't have to be fully edited. So there's a lot of ways that we can make it a lot easier. So if you were to tell yourself something, or to the listeners who are considering starting a podcast, what would you tell them?
I mean, definitely just try it. Just start. And my first conversation never made it to air, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to try something and adjust as you go, and be okay with that. Like, it turns out my first conversation, what I hadn't quite refined was like the topic and like how I wanted to frame it. So that conversation ended up being quite different from where I eventually went. But I think I needed that conversation to work through that and get there. And that's okay. Just being like, just start. I mean, I think this is the challenge with most things. It's just a question of starting and finding that like first little step that you can move you forward. And it might be just buying a mic, or like going onto Amazon and finding a mic. And it's quite easy to do. They're great reviews, and just finding one that's in your budget that feels like it can work to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of a follow-up question. So getting started is usually the hardest part for some people. It's like, I feel like it's a 50-50. Some people are like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to start. And the other 50% are like, oh, I have no problem starting. I'm so excited to do this. But then how do I stay consistent with it? Do you have any tips for like how you've managed to have now, what did you say, 8 seasons or
Well, I'm starting on season 6, but
6? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do for me with motivation. What is my motivation for doing this? So, I mean, in my case, my podcast is my thing, and it is my creative outlet. It's the process through which I work through my own challenges and better understand people. And I think that's ultimately what I find so interesting and fascinating. Um, Really an understanding of your why, like why you're doing this. And that, if you really feel like it's a deep enough why, for me, it's like I feel like these conversations are valuable for me as a person, but also like to be able to share those with other women. Like I really strongly believe we just need to humanize the process and the struggles that we go through, which I don't find happens anywhere else. So I believe so strongly in that I keep coming back season after season. And I take the summers off, and I have down periods where it takes me a little bit longer to get things up, like podcast episodes out, but I just keep showing up. And that to me seems valuable to me. So that keeps me going.
I love it. And I guess that's, one reason why I have no issues continuing on with my podcast, because it's the one thing in my business that I absolutely love doing every single time that I get to, turn on the mic and share something that I was curious about, or that I learned differently, or that I just got to have conversations with other amazing women like you to get your experience and your feedback and share that with others. I just think it's so valuable. And I love podcasting too, because as a busy mom, like I pop my headphones in, while I'm vacuuming or while I'm washing the dishes. So it makes it very easy and accessible. And I just like that option for people as well. Whereas I can't even remember the last time I sat down and read a blog, even though I love writing. Like it doesn't work very well that way. So you have to find something that you're passionate about doing and that also, aligns with your skill set and interest. So for me, podcasting was like the perfect match.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. But what is interesting when you talk about it is you get excited about sharing your ideas and sharing all these things and that you find so valuable. And, I think if somebody's feeling like they're dreading the podcast, then maybe they just need to have some more curiosity around like why they're doing this and what really lights them up. And that's a journey in itself, obviously. And to let go of an expectation that you have to know it right now, but trying something new, like all these things about trying are like help us get to that place of understanding ourselves better and what really lights us up. And yeah, so it's just like keep trying. If I can give anybody any advice, it's just like keep trying, like keep going. You will get there. And there's no end point either. Like I don't even feel I'm there, like it's sure it's like, but yeah, I'm just gonna keep going and trying new things and see where it takes me.
Yep. Oh, for sure. My podcast has evolved even within like the 70-ish episodes that I published. So, like it changed the way we edit or change the way that I'm doing the social media content. I've got like a form in place now so that I can collect people's information and I'm not like a scatterbrained bird trying to put it together and then waiting for people to like send me their website links and all of those things. So you can start with wherever you're at and then you just kind of keep building and going as you go and it'll just kind of all come together. But you're right. I don't think that there's a definitive endpoint for podcasting. Like there's never there's always things that you could do differently or better, how you could share, promote, connect with people. One of the things when I first started podcasting, I was like, well, I'm going to try it for a little while. I'm not sure how long I'll be able to do it. How am I going to have so many like continuous ideas of things to talk about? It's like, there's only so many different areas of marketing. Like how many guests can I really have on? But even if you have a guest, in the same topic area or field, they have different things to share. People get different messages and golden nuggets out of the episodes too. So, it kind of surprises me that way anyway, that there's always something new to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point because everybody's had a different journey and experiences to get to where they are. And maybe they have the same perspective, but how they got there might be different. And everyone might be able to relate to that story in a different way and maybe inspire themselves in a different way. So I think you can take one topic and honestly go on an infinity in terms of conversations that you can have about it.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation today. So for those people listening, where can they find you and your podcast? Because they really should check it out.
Oh, thanks, Brittany. Yes, definitely find me on Finding Me Podcast and all your podcast platforms, and as well on Instagram, Finding Me Podcast.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure that I get all of that linked in the show notes for you so that it makes it nice and easy. And Leith, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was fabulous chatting with you.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me. It's not often I'm like telling my story, and that's something that I want to start doing more. So I appreciate it.
You need someone to like come on and interview you for your own podcast.
That's it. Anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. And until next time, we will see you next week on the Go Get Great podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to Go Get Great. I hope you found some useful tips and tricks that can help you make life and business work together. If what I said resonates with you, please share it on social media and don't forget to tag at Brittany Miller's socials so that I can celebrate you for taking those first steps towards achieving greatness. Remember, success doesn't happen overnight. It takes dedication, hard work, and a lot of spirit. So don't be afraid to dream big and go after what you want. Keep striving for greatness. You get closer with every step forward, no matter how small they may seem. Until next time, go get great.